I represent the Waterloo Institute for Social Innovation and Resilience, which is at the University of Waterloo. And what I'm going to try to do just in the next 15, 20 minutes is to actually look a little bit at the kind of rich veins of theory and practice that have been developing in different parts of the world, and try to go slightly below the surface in the work we've been doing at Waterloo Institute for Social Innovation and Resilience. So, as most of you will be familiar with Stephen Johnson's notion about where good ideas come from. And he and Brian Arthur, who also wrote the book on the nature of technology, have chosen to take a complexity lens to look at, how ideas emerge. And they argue that within that complexity framework, we are dealing with emergence. We're also dealing with bricolage, the piecing together of old ideas into new forms. And trying to understand how that happens, we need to look at the notion of the adjacent possible. Those ideas or things or inventions that are separate but associated close to us, in proximity to us, and how those actually combine and recombine to move towards the future. So when I look back, as Laura was talking about, from my perspective, on what are those kind of building blocks, what are the adjacent possible that has shaped where we're going today, I see a number of such building blocks. I see management business school theories, which I spent a number of years at McGill in the business school. I see work in sociology, both social movements and some of the basic theoretical frameworks of Anthony Giddens and the notion of cross-scale interactions. I see a good bit of complexity theory, and I also see some kinds of system ecology. And these have come up, these different frameworks have produced a number of other related frameworks. So in the business management school, you have corporate social responsibility, entrepreneurship, innovation theory, strategy process, leadership, all domains in which there are established research traditions. You also see the system ecology producing a great deal of knowledge about how complex adaptive systems work and the ways in which resilience as a particular piece of complexity theory allows us to understand phases and stages of resilient systems, which include and actually integrate some of the innovation theory of Schumpeter and the notion of adaptive cycle and infinity loops. And, finally, there's been considerable work around complexity management and leadership, which brings together some of those complexity paradigms with the rest of the business thinkers. So these are the ones that I personally have experienced and encountered and have fueled our thinking. There are probably more. I mean, one of the exciting things about bringing together this particular group of people is that we can dig down and look at what are those paradigms and epistemologies that are underpinning our work. There's a rich set of ideas out there that we're using and we're combining and in fact have deep roots. So although social innovation isn't really a field yet, it's a set of interests and foci, it is deeply grounded, and I think that's an important thing to remember. So within that, I can think of 4 or 5 different areas where people have been working: social entrepreneurship, social enterprise, drawing on corporate social responsibility and entrepreneurship; innovation process, drawing on innovation theory and strategy process; institutional entrepreneurship, coming out of complexity management, leadership, and also complexity theory, as well as some of the sociological cross-scale analysis theories; socio-technical transitions and multi-scale interactions; social ecological transformations. And all of these, I think, and again, I don't want to limit it to that, because I think there are potentially other schools of thought. Some of the thinking certainly that's going on now around design thinking, design labs. We're working also on social innovation labs. Nesta's working on that approach. They also contribute to that. But I think of these as kind of major building blocks, those 5. And they're also associated with a number of centers who are represented here, and this is by no means conclusive, but these are ones that I personally have interacted with and collaborated with: SCOL, Nesta, STEP and DRIFT, Stockholm Resilience Center, And WISA, we're at the center of that. There are obviously others here that are, some of which are very established. CREES coming out of Montreal, the Bertha Center in South Africa, a number of emergent centers in Europe, which I think are going to be accelerated by these big EU grants. So they exist, and they work separately, and we've started to exchange. This may be the first time everyone, with the exception of Stockholm Resilience Center, but I sort of think I can represent them as well, and Semi's worked with them as well a great deal, are here in the room. So, it represents these sort of building blocks that we can think about bringing together. Now, WISER obviously is situating itself in that institutional entrepreneurship, innovation space, socio-technical transitions, socio-ecological transitions. So we're taking a fairly broad and perspective and a complexity perspective. Our definition, and we know that definitions abound, is changing the system dynamics that created the problem in the first place. So we say that social innovation is any initiative, product, process, program, project, or platform that challenges and over time contributes to changing the defining routines, resources, and authority flows or beliefs of the broader social system in which it's introduced. So successful social innovations have durability, scale, and transformative impact. And I want to really underline that this definition is not either superior or inferior to any of the others that are out there. It's just the definition that comes from the kind of epistemology and approach of the researchers who are working there. So it causes us to look at certain parts of the dynamic and process, to privilege certain approaches or lenses in exploring it. And I believe that there are others out there that are building equally valid insights with other definitions. So we don't really want to get into struggling about which definition is correct. I think this is the time to begin to think across them. So at WISA, because of that approach, we've got a number of research projects that are going on. One of our first set of projects, which were case-based qualitative work, we're really looking at institutional entrepreneurs and the process of complex system change. We drew heavily on innovation process frameworks in looking at this. So, as many of you know who are in that field, there's a focus in large, complex organizations that are continuously innovating about the role of a certain set of actors in that process who are able to question, so what is termed the strategic apex, and frame what they see there, the opportunities which are happening at that level for people who are working much more at the coalface of the front lines, but then to identify and sell innovations that fit with strategic opportunities in the organization. And they represent a key ingredient in the transformation process in attaching good ideas into opportunities. Now, when you move that into the social domain, you get increased complexity, obviously. You have political systems, economic systems, cultural systems, legal systems, alligiddons really existing at an institutional level. And you have, innovations or inventions occurring in organizations, in communities, but again, in a sense at the coalface where work needs to be done. But you also see these pivotal figures, in addition to social entrepreneurs, who act to make these connections, to connect the resource of a new idea with an opportunity that's happening at a broader institutional context. So we've done a fair amount of work and developed that, and part of that, as we looked across organizations and systems where we were seeing change happen, has resulted in us spending quite a bit of time focusing on what we see as the difference between scaling out and scaling up. So scaling out really means for us the movement of an idea across different organizations, different communities, different individuals. It's in a sense, somewhat related to the notion of diffusion innovation, that you actually get the idea to spread. But one of the things that we began to see looking at institutional entrepreneurs, that was necessary, but not sufficient. So many efforts to scale out did not result in system transformation that tended in some ways to overload the social entrepreneurs who were trying to do it. And then you would see this phenomena, which in social ecological transformation they call remembrance, where the broader system actually pushes that innovation back into a conformity spot, and you don't see the transformation. So we began to see and looking at a number of different organizations, that there was a point where most social entrepreneurs actually felt like they either had to connect to or become institutional entrepreneurs or system entrepreneurs. They had to switch gears because they were frustrated by the limits of scaling out. Now, that didn't necessarily happen in that sort of sequential way I'm describing it. In many cases, people are working at all scales at the same time. But the skills for scaling out and scaling up are somewhat different. And so not necessarily the same people that can do both. So we found that a useful distinction and an important one for trying to look again, remembering what our definition of a social innovation is, trying to understand how that broad transformation happens. Partly based on that particular work and some of the insights that we gained from that work about the ways in which the starting conditions of the founding organization or invention were fairly prophetic about in terms of how the pathway it needed to take as it scaled up, and also discovering that in many cases the very strength of the idea turned into a weakness when you tried to scale it up. So the very precision of a particular program, when you tried to actually position it in a much broader system, meant that there was a sort of rigidity where they needed to hybridize it to some extent, but couldn't necessarily do it. Or the very broadness, in another case, of multiple ideas and being stimulated by, say, a membership group, actually risked losing some of that base because in order to scale up, you had to focus it in order to sell it to the next level. So those kind of insights actually made us think, well, what would happen if we took a much longer frame? And I should mention that this particular project, if you want to hear more about it, we do have another paper Nina Antadze's doing, where she's going to dive much more closely into that project. So we move then to this broader historical frame. And you're not going to be able to see this at all, but these are a set of kind of Prezi-like that I've just cut and pasted here, in which we're making an effort over time. This is the internet, the case of the internet, which is actually the shortest one we're looking at, because we're looking at things like female contraception, we're looking at national park system in the US, we're looking at derivatives and derivative markets, we're looking at partnerships, we're looking at Aboriginal schools, we're hoping to look at mass education that are very, in fact, established. And we wanted to do two things in taking this historical perspective. Wanted to go back to the Brian Arthur and Stephen Johnson hypothesis that good ideas initially start with a kind of breakthrough, a new way of looking at things. In technology, it was often a scientific breakthrough. We felt that in the social realm, we had discussions with both of them. The social realm, this is often a political philosophy or a new idea. So we wanted to take ones that clearly had succeeded in transformation, track it back in part to see whether we could identify such an idea. But also looking at our enduring preoccupations about the adjacent possible and the role of agency. And some of the stuff that's coming out, which is fascinating, is, as you'll see, those blue lines are essentially adjacent possible. There is a lot of parallel things coming on that weave in and out of an innovation over time. Where the eyes are, if you can see those are when we clearly can see agency, and we can see over time that for really successful innovation, that agency has to be passed on a number of times. We also see new ideas, the light bulbs coming in to shape it. But interestingly enough, we'll often see that the starting conditions in these cases, even after several hundred years, are also prophetic. So it reminds you of Weber and the notion of the iron cage, that, for example, in the internet, the founding organization, which is ARPANET, was actually set up during the 60s and the anti-Civil War society with this notion or approach that was predominant in the US at then, even though it was set up within the Army. And it had this ethos of, actually making everything free and equal and not allowing bureaucracy or the man to come in and control things. And even now, some 40, 50 years later, we're seeing that same ethos in some of the debates about WikiLeaks, et cetera, about where it is. So we found this across all of them, that there were certain enduring characteristics. Again, we have another presentation. Catherine McGowan's going to dig in somewhat more deeply to this if you're interested in looking at this. So, of course, across these, and I'm nearly done here now, but across these different projects, we've had to grapple with with methodology, and that always comes up, right? When you're It's really trying to consolidate a research domain, starting from all these different approaches. And after considerable struggle, we found ourselves joining with a lot of emerging work in complexity paradigms about how one kind of approach just doesn't cut it for very complex problems. And we held a workshop where we brought a lot of those folks together and came up with this model where we felt that there was a constant movement back and forth between the notion of expert-driven research and obviously participatory research, action research, then a process of abstract generalization, theory building, model building, and in a sense statistical models, model testing, and the kind of understanding, the case-based, concrete understanding of things that are unfolding. And you may locate yourself in any one of those when you start, but chances are that you're going to move around in it. So, just describing what we did, we began with that case-based research, moved into some grounded theory, moved into a number of practice contexts where we're working in our local area and helping agencies and groups to accelerate or to understand what's happening. Then back to theory again to cases again as we're doing this historical case. And the last one that I want to speak to you about is the notion of starting really a social innovation database. And we've been inspired by this by work that's going on at the Stockholm Resilience Center, where they formed a web-based database on regime shifts, a key piece in understanding how systems transform. And what they did through all this case-based work, they created a whole set of variables, and they've posted that, and the invitation is for people working all over the world to come in and to formulate their cases so that they fit into that particular model, and then this database is open and people can begin to look across cases. I think we're nearly there. From our perspective of the work we've done, these are some of the variables that we think are important. What I'm partly hoping is that out of this particular workshop, we will be challenged in those and add to those and refine those. But if we can establish that kind of thing, we can begin to find a platform where we can put all our work together. And I think the time is ripe for that. So, finally, I think we all hunger for that simplicity on the other side of complexity. When we're in an emerging field like this, we look for the consolidation. But I would partly urge us not to move too quickly on that. When you think about that notion of the adjacent possible, I think we're actually right where we need to be at this point. We have multiple rich, source disciplines. We have well-developed thematic areas that we've been working in. We're coming together at a workshop like this to find a way to exchange and learn about that. And we have practitioners here too, because most of us move back and forth from theory to practice. This is because ultimately I think we're all infused by a very similar ethos. We're unusual in the research community in that sense because we do want to understand, we do want to illuminate, but we go into this area partly because we would like to see those kinds of transformations happen. We'd like to see, in a sense, small p transformations that happen without big politics, that happen without revolution in the streets, but that happen in an urgent and immediate way because we feel that many of the broad systems that we're looking at are broken. I think we have a real chance to do this in a workshop like this. We can really accelerate. We can leap forward, in a sense, in terms of our understanding. And I think it really just depends on us continuing to be open for a little while longer, engaging each other's epistemologies, really trying to understand how that relates to our own, not getting captured in methodological orthodoxy, which has plagued so many disciplines. But remember that, in a sense, we're part of an enterprise that's larger than research itself, but I think gives research a profound and fundamental purpose. So thanks very much.